Afternoon. Good afternoon. I will not be able to check if I'm live or if I'm able to hear myself on the other channels because I'm out and about. So I really hope you all can hear me. And if you can, please comment and let me know that you can hear me. I got an alert that I am live on a channel. So I wanted to, just talk with y'all because I came to the realization within the last few days that I had allowed the enemy to stifle my voice in the form of my testimony. And sometimes we can get so caught up in the warfare. We can get so caught up in having to defend ourselves. And when I say defend ourselves, not against people, but I'm saying spiritually through prayer. And God will put us in a season where He hides us, where He says you don't need to share certain things and don't need to tell certain things. But sometimes we as people can extend a season that God has said is over. And what I realized is that the enemy had crept in a place of robbing me of my joy by keeping me silent, and not silent in the area of prayer or prophecy or even the word of God, silent in the area of testimony. And what's so amazing about the testimony is that God will give you the ability to testify so you can encourage someone else on their journey to see that God is still moving in this area. You may be the only voice that a person is able to tap into, and you may have the only bit of familiarity with their situation that can give them the assurance that God does see and hear me, and He is telling me to keep going, and He's pushing me through this thing. And if you did it for them, He could do it for me. And so we reference that in the Bible, but we forget that God uses us day to day. And so I just been in a place of rejoicing that I always a lot of the things that I've always contended with was fear from the lane that the enemy was trying to rob me of my voice, but I couldn't quite understand where he was robbing or stifling me. And so I began to be loud in areas where God wasn't asking me to be loud. He said, I hear you at this frequency here, but you are trying to echo yourself here because you're being stifled over here, but you can't see over here because this is where the enemy is contending against you. So if that's you, I want to encourage you, never stop testifying. Never stop talking about the goodness of God. Don't allow people or anything around you to tell you that you can't speak about what God has done in your life because somebody needs it. All right. So I wanted to share that, but I'm coming on here not just to remind you to keep testifying no matter what, but there is a theme that has been trending, and when I say trending, I don't mean like social media trending. I mean just happening, an occurrence that I'm noticing in the area of grief. And maybe a year ago, God told me that we were going to enter into this time of grief, but I associated this time of grief with death, with physical death, sicknesses and illnesses. But what I'm seeing is that it's not necessarily a time of grief in the area of death with losing people. It's an area of grief with our understanding. It's an area of grief with our intellect. It's an area of grief with the vision and the sight and the perspectives that we have in our life and in things that we have expectations of or have had expectations of. And so I've just been really sitting with this and pondering on how, we receive things from God and we hear from Him, but sometimes we mismanage how we hear it simply because we're expecting it to come another way. And this is right in the lane of what He's showing me with grief. Right now, you are feeling like you have to release things and you have to move on and you have to let things go. But I think the biggest way that the enemy has been contending against us is that he's making us think. When God says grieve something, we are looking at grieving people. We're looking at relational grieving. God is not asking us to grieve people. He's asking us to grieve our perception of people. He's asking us to grieve our viewpoint of people. He's asking us to grieve our understanding of people. He's asking us to grieve the areas that we have placed what we have perceived things to be on someone else. He's asking us to grieve our expectations of people. And so this does not mean that you're supposed to be cutting people off or separating from them, but rather it means that you are supposed to be releasing what you expect, what you feel, what you have thought about a particular person or a situation. And I think this is so profound because the enemy has a way of creeping into our situations and contorting the words that God is speaking to us. And he will have us out here on a boat of isolation. And we're wondering, how in the world did I get here? I know I heard God. You did hear God. You just mismanaged the words and the way you were hearing because of some things that you had going on. And so I just thought it was so profound. It was like, God, a lot of people here have heard my testimony about my marriage. If you haven't heard it, then you'll hear it one day. I'm not here to testify about that right now. But what I saw was that when God allowed me to break, and what I saw was shattered pieces everywhere. God was seeing a whole picture of the woman that he had called as an intercessor who could rise up and who could shake nations with her voice. And so what I was seeing was fractures. I was seeing was pain. I was seeing was a misunderstanding. But God was seeing a whole picture. And from that he was able to birth the daughter or the woman that he called to arise in an area. But what I had to grieve was not the marriage, was not the person. I had to grieve my ideology of what marriage was supposed to be. I had to grieve my expectations of what my husband was supposed to be. I had to grieve that time and season that I thought I was in. I had to grieve what had happened to me as a little girl that made me have a certain expectation or understanding of what this union was supposed to look like. I had to grieve the falsehoods that I had created to be the truth. I had to grieve even the things that I did or that I said or that I spoke or even that I thought about myself that put me in that position. And what God was showing me in that is that these fragmented pieces that he's asking us to grieve will allow us to receive the whole vision of who he's called us to be in this space. It's so important that we do not continue to allow our fragmented thinking and those pain points that we have experienced to take us outside our understanding of what God has spoken to us about who we are and his expectation of how we are to move forward. And even in that, some of you have heard me testify multiple times about my pregnancies and what they have looked like, right? And even in that, God showed me you have to grieve what pregnancy looks like for you. You have to grieve your understanding of what this experience is because I was holding on to what I expected pregnancy to be for me. When I came upon those illnesses in my pregnancy, then I was faced with anxiety because now I'm holding on to my perspective, my expectation, my understanding of what pregnancy is supposed to look like. And so because I'm holding on to that, God cannot move in and move me out this place of anxiousness because the anxiety was grounding me into what I thought it was supposed to be. So when I was able to look at pregnancy differently and see that, whoa, wait a minute, God has called you to the area of nonprofit. God has called you to maternal health in predominantly Black communities and brown communities. How can you know that God is using you in this area of maternal health if you have not had a pain point and the experiences that you've had in your pregnancies? So I say, God, why just 6 pregnancies over I had to deal with this? But he said, because I chose you for something that I needed you. And if you change your understanding, if you grieve this perspective that you had about pregnancy, then you will mature in a place to see that I am using you even in that now. And so this thing about grief that we're doing, what we're experiencing, it is a grief of the unknown, right? You have to grieve what you don't know, what you thought life was supposed to look like, what the future holds for you, and you have to allow those things. And the hardest part about grief is releasing what you knew, releasing how you have constructed things in your mind based on your childhood, based on your imagination, based on your understanding, based on what you lack, based on what you gain, based on what you learn, right? And you have to release those things so God can then place inside of you his vision. See, the thing about in the book of Jeremiah, it says, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. This before means before time, I cultivated and I created you to be what I needed you to be. I'm sorry, let me go back. Before I formed you, I knew you. Let's start there. Before I formed you, I knew you, which means there was a relationship with you and God before your parents even got together, before your grandparents even got together, before your great grandparents even got together. There was a knowing between you and God. There was a relationship that was established between you and God. And He knew you. And then He said, He set you apart. There was a consecration that happened. When something is set apart or set aside, it's set for something else. It means it can't be like the others. It's set over here because there's something different about it. There's something unique about it. God was saying that before your parents even got together, I knew you. And not only did I know you, I set you apart to be different, right? You have a sauce that's different than the other ones. Your barbecue sauce doesn't taste like the others, right? You have a uniqueness about you that could not allow you to be gathered with other people, right? So my nose is just itching, y'all. Okay, what is going on with this nose? Nosy too. Okay, but anyway, and so then he said, "I called you. I called you to be a prophet." And even when we look at this word prophet, we know that this was a literal calling to Jeremiah. But even in the vein of prophet, that has to do with speaking, because even in the next verses, Jeremiah says, I'm just a child. I can't speak." So God is saying, before I formed you, I knew you. There's relationship. Then I set you aside. I set you aside for a specific purpose. I created you for something different, something that could not be like the others. And then I called you to speak about this thing. I called you to speak about this area that I set you aside in. And so sometimes we have to realize that when life comes upon us, we have to grieve what we expected life to be. We have to grieve even the things that God has allowed us to go through that made us who we are. You still have to grieve those, because if you don't, you will carry them over into the place where God has called you to speak to people and to help them out of situations. And you cannot do that if you remain stuck. So there's a place in you that has to be able to say, you know what, God, I relinquish and I release myself from my own understanding, my own intellect, my own mindset, my own vision, my own perspective, my own viewpoint of what I have said this situation is supposed to look like in my life. And it doesn't mean, again, that God is saying relational grief. I'm not telling you to separate from people. I'm telling you to separate from your perspective of what you expect those people to be, because you're holding on to a vision of something that was never meant to be placed on that person, and it is killing you and it is killing them. So today I need you to release what you have seen or what you have thought life was supposed to look like, so I can step you into the place that I have had for you. And this is an area of heartbreak. We don't necessarily see how grief is heart. Y'all, I don't know why my nose is itching like this, but if y'all is watching a replay, just know my nose is itching. But if y'all have understand that heartbreak, there is a place in heartbreak where grief enters in. And we often think about heartbreak as relationships ending, again, people separating for us. We don't see, even in the text when we're reading the Bible, people have to, their hearts break because they have to be entered into a new space. And you can't enter into that new space without that breaking, right? So you have to then release the pain to God so that He can then show you how this pain was supposed to work for you, how this pain is working for your benefit, how it actually is for your good. So I just wanted today to be a day where you understand what grief is happening in this season. It's not just grief in the loss of people. It's not just grief in the death. It's death to an identity that you have created in your mind about what you have expected life to look like for you. And in that, there are some things that you have to release and let go of so that God can take you to where He needs you to be. Because without Him, there is nothing. You've got to remember that this journey is about testifying. Testifying is where you share about the goodness of God and what He's doing, no matter what the situation looks like, no matter how it has perceived itself to be. And so I want you to embrace where you are and release those things. You will feel so much better. There was a specific thing that I kept hearing God say to me, and I did not catch the revelation and the full understanding of what God was saying to me till this morning. And it was only after I spent the last 3 days repenting and releasing, right? Repenting and releasing, grieving things that I thought it was supposed to be. And when I did that, I was able to hear. Yesterday, I saw a speaker he said, all day yesterday, I want you to listen. And so all day I just listened to God and I spoke. And I listened and I spoke back to him. And today I woke up with a new understanding that my paradigm and my mind was able to shift into the place that God wanted me to be because I was able to release what I thought life was supposed to look like. So for you, understand that this season of grief is not just about people. It's about you. Do you hear me? I had to let it be quiet. This season of grief is not about grieving people. It's about you grieving the identity you thought you were supposed to have, grieving the way you thought life was supposed to look, grieving the place you thought life was supposed to take you, grieving what you thought it was supposed to look like. This is about you grieving you so God can show you who he's already designed you to be when he set you apart, when he knew you. I want you to understand the importance of this, Jeremiah, because when he says, before I formed you, I knew you, and before your parents got together, I knew you, this means that there is a place and a relationship and an identity with you and God that is so different than anything else. It's not dependent upon your genealogy. It's not dependent upon the blood. We know all these things with deliverance, where we have to be delivered from bloodline curses and all these things. But I want you to understand something. God was telling Jeremiah that before even you got to all of that, I knew you and I set you apart to be different. And I called you to speak. And it is not about your age. It is not about your family. It is not about where you live. It's about none of that other than my relationship with you. It's about your identity. So today I want to remind you, grieve. Grieve the things that you thought you were supposed to be. Grieve the places that you placed. Grieve the ideologies you placed on people. Grieve your perspectives. Grieve the misalignments that you had in your life. Grieve the places you thought you were supposed to go. The people you thought you were supposed to be connected to so you can step into the place that God has for you. And I want you to know today that God loves you. He loves you no matter what you think, how you messed up, or where you thought you were supposed to be and you weren't. He loves you regardless. There is nothing that can separate you from the love of Christ. There is nothing that can separate you from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus. Nothing. Nothing. About to go into tongues. Okay, so that's not what this is about. So I want to encourage you, check this link below. Go click this link below, and I want you to check out this guide. When I wrote this guide, I think it came out last year, and it was birthed out of a combination of things, right? When I was able to give language to it, then it was focused on heartbreak, but that's not the language that God, because there's a whole section in here about grief. And now I understand that God was wanting us to be in position to receive the life that he has for us, to enter into a space with him that allows him to be Lord in our life, allows him to be king of our life, allows him to be the head of our life. And that means allowing him to show himself to who we are to be. All right. So y'all have an amazing day. Please go check this out. It will bless you. Share with a friend and tag somebody, allow them to see it as well, purchase it for them on their behalf. Someone you know that's going through a hard time, that's trying to grieve a situation, and maybe they're looking at it from just one's perspective of a person. Help them to see themselves. This guy will help you to see yourself in the lane that God has for you. And so y'all have an amazing day. Be blessed, and I will talk to you.